Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. We're big, we're bad, we're back, we're not in black for another Frequently Asked Questions Friday. FAQ Friday. So we just had a rather wonderful 12 days globe-trotting. We went to Berlin and worked at Hansa Studios for a few days. And you probably saw the resultant video from a couple of days ago. It was so much fun. Thank you ever so much to our artist, Charlie Klauser. Thank you ever so much to Alex from the studio manager, for showing us around. What an incredible studio. If you haven't checked it out already, please check it out. There'll be some kind of links and stuff to it. Such an insanely amazing city. I loved being in Berlin. We all did. And what an incredible studio with amazing history, doing those 3 Bowie albums, Low, Lodger and Heroes, plus of course Depeche Mode, and many, many, many other incredible records were done there. So we had a wonderful time. As ever, please hit that like button, subscribe, go to producelikeapro.com, sign up for the email list, get a whole bunch of free goodies. And of course, you can try out the 14-day free trial of the Academy. Okay, we're going to get stuck in with some wonderful questions this week in FAQ Friday. When bouncing, how do you feel about master bus processing? The SSL bus compressor doing about 2 to 3 dB of compression, for instance. That's a great question. That's a wonderful question. When I'm bouncing tracks, I do a gentle amount of compression on the master bus and actually some EQ. I have a couple of choices. I either use my SSL bus compressor here, giving me around about 2 to 3 dB worth of gain reduction, or I use the Tegeler Cream up there, again, giving a similar 2 to 3 dB worth of gain reduction. Also, using the EQ of the Tegeler. Now, you may have noticed, and in previous videos, that I also have a pair of real Pultecs, which I use on this bus compression. So, yes, I do it. I do bus compress and EQ. Only 2 to 3 dB and a little bit of boom and fizz, a little bit of 60 hertz, a little bit of 10 or 12K. That's all I'll do. And I'll do maybe a dB of each. I like mixing through gentle bus compression and gentle bus EQ. And I do print with that on. I also mix with it on. And it's there the whole time, gently hitting everything. Now, bear in mind, I'm doing obviously compression and EQ on individual channels before reaching the bus compressor. That means it's fairly controlled. I don't use my master bus compressor to fix all of the problems. That is where everything goes horribly wrong and where top-down mixing doesn't work. If you're loading your master bus with tons of EQ compression, multiband compressors, MS techniques, limiting, all of this stuff, which is what a lot of people unfortunately are advocating, you're not really going to learn much about mixing because you're just slamming stuff in there and it's all getting squashed down and multiband compressed and EQ'd. I would say a gentle amount of compression, a gentle amount of EQ is not going to do you any harm. If you listen to your bus compressor and it's squashing the schnizzle out of everything, then obviously that's a difficult thing. If you want to only apply gentle compression and EQ at the very end, I applaud you. That's a great way of working. Often I'll do this. I'll lean over and just bring this in and out to see how much compression I'm really applying. And if it's something that becomes inaudible, then it's not as necessarily a bad thing. If it's applying a gentle amount of compression, but I'm not hearing that much of a change, then it's doing its job. It's just taming some of those transients. Now, when I say inaudible, you don't want it so it's actually not doing anything. That was my exaggeration. You want to hear it, but you just want to hear it tame transients and just tuck things in. In some ways, I like it because it is reminiscent of what tape used to do for us. Tape would nicely control those transients, and now we need other devices to do that. But of course, you can do that with tape emulations inside of your DAW as well, but there's nothing wrong with gentle bus compression, gentle bus EQ. Just use it sparingly, and if you want, apply it at the end, but you can bounce with it on. A mastering engineer will love you giving him or her something that is really nicely controlled. Just don't slam the schnizzle out of it with multiband compression, EQ, limiting, compression, everything, like 15 stacked plugins. You'll get a mix to sound even, but it will not sound exciting, and it certainly will not do your mastering engineer any favors. I'd like your opinion on whether IRs are a true replacement for a mic and cab. Marvelous question. Yes. Honestly, I think IRs are a saving grace when it comes to using virtual instruments. I mean, they're huge. We do it all the time now. You can put it on synths and stuff like that just to make them feel not so flat and dry, and just make them feel like they went through an amp cab or something like that. So I am a big fan of them. I think the only thing that I would advocate when it comes to miking over not miking is that you can get something that's uniquely yours. If you're miking your own cab with your own mic and your own mic pre, of course, it's going to sound nothing like somebody else's emulation. IRs are very accurate and do immediately change the sound dramatically. If you go through like 20 different IRs and different cabs with different speakers and different miking, you can dramatically change the sound. You can make a fizzy sounding thin virtual instrument into something that sounds completely different. So IRs are a massive saving grace. But if you're asking me the pros and cons, the pros are that you can turn digital sounding instruments into something that sounds remarkably more natural, more organic, more like what our ears are used to, quite frankly. However, why would you want to mic a cab then? Well, you want to mic a cab to get your own result. So I don't think one is better or worse, because of course, if you're using a digital instrument and you use an outside IR, you might be the only person doing that combination. However, if you do have the ability to record your own cab, yes, it's going to be unique. It's going to be your sound and your sound only. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. I do both. I use IRs and I record cabs uniquely, and I love both processes. So if you have that ability to record your own cabs, do it. But also remember, there's cheap alternative ways to get amazingly quick results. That is what is wonderful about digital. So God bless it. Do you gain stage tracks before mixing? Yes, quite often. Not on stuff I've recorded, because I record it at a level that makes sense through my equipment. But definitely when people send me stuff. I get sent stuff that's like super, super hot and then barely audible. And if it's clipping, then there's not a lot I can do. I will bring it down. There are a number of plugins out there which can remove clips. They're not perfect, but they do help. So often people send me stuff which is really badly clipped, and I have to do that and then gain it down. More often than not, I see the opposite. Sometimes we're sent tracks that I don't know there's audio on there until we make the view go up like 500 or 600%, and then suddenly a track will start to appear. Usually that's okay because it's a digital only signal, so there's no inherent noise in there. But there are times when, unfortunately, it is a lot of noise. You start amplifying the track so it's actually loud enough to be able to use. You bring up the gain, but also bringing up a huge amount of noise. Hence, the signal to noise ratio is not good. So those are the times I do it. On my own stuff, no, I don't need to do that because we're printing in nice big fat tones that I can do whatever I want with. I can turn up or down. So just be mindful that you print a decent enough level. It doesn't have to be 90% of the screen, but give yourself enough level. Don't worry about the LUFS, as Warren Sokol was explaining. That's the average of the whole length of the track. Just use common sense. Don't clip it and don't make it so it's inaudible. Somewhere in between not clipping and not visible on the screen is a good, safe place. It's really just use common sense, because then if there's any gain, like a dB or two either way, it's not going to make that much of an issue. You've got so many plugins you're going to apply that can give you more or less gain. That shouldn't be something you're concerned about. You shouldn't need to normalize all your tracks. You just need to work within logic, printing a good, nice, loud, but not too loud, without clipping signal, with decent signal to noise ratio. Just use common sense. Anybody can work with that. Any mixer in the world will be able to take your tracks and mix them. I've never heard a mixer complain that it was like, oh, it's 1 dB too quiet or 1 dB too loud. Nobody thinks or talks that way. So take that pressure off yourself. Just print good, loud, fat tones that aren't clipping, and don't print inaudible tracks that you have to bring up so loud that it's all just noise. I hope you're enjoying this week's Fact Friday. Of course, please hit the like button, leave us a comment and questions below. If there's anything about this video you want to discuss more, please don't hesitate to do that. Do you think it makes sense to look for a mixing engineer who uses the same DAW as oneself? This way, one could send the DAW files and the engineer could open the project and enable or disable the effects within the project itself without needing to go back and forth with the different tracks. What are your thoughts on that? That is a marvelous question. I think the answer's within the question. How did you record? Are you recording a ton of DIs and virtual instruments? If you are, then it would make a lot of sense for your mixer to also use the same DAW. They'll be able to open it up and see all of the virtual instruments and all of the tons of plugins you've got on it. If they don't have the same DAW as you, then yes, you're going to be a little bit up Schnizzle Creek. You know, you're going to open up, they're not going to see all those plugins, they're not going to be able to enable all of that stuff. So a lot of guys, bigger professional guys and girls who do mix with Pro Tools. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So if you're in Pro Tools, you're probably in luck. They're going to open up and see your plugins. Almost every mixer I know owns every plugin possible, and if they don't, they get it. That's just part of the job if you're a professional mixer. However, it is important to realize that not every single mixer is going to be in Pro Tools, and that is quite all right. You know, there's plenty of guys I know that work exclusively in Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, Logic, and many more, and they're all amazing. You know, the DAW is a tool that you need to know, and if you know it inside or out, that's better than just using the same one as everybody else. If you know Studio One like the back of your hand, then you know Studio One like the back of your hand. In that instance, you have one of two choices. And what a lot of people do is they have the original signal, and then they have the audio that has been run through the plugins. So they'll get the sound that you have created. And then they'll have like the original source that didn't have those plugins on. That is one way around it. It does make things a little bit more difficult because they've got to emulate your sounds. And if they don't like all of the effect that you have on of your printed track, then they have no way to subtly undo it. They can't get there and open up a plugin and reduce the amount of EQ you've done. They can't reduce the amount of saturation. It's difficult. So yes, in an ideal world, I wish we were all on the same DAW and all owned the same plugins. However, schnizzle happens, and great people make great music on all kinds of DAWs. So don't necessarily look for somebody who has the same DAW as you. If you like their mixes, then they will have encountered all kinds of issues of all kinds of other DAWs, and they will know how to work around it. Choosing somebody based on their DAW is not smart. To be honest, choosing somebody based on their resume is only the beginning. You want to listen to the music they've created. If they happen to work with a band you like, that's a good start. But listen to that. Maybe the album they did or the song they did is like not typical of the band. So a little bit of research on your mixer is always a good test. And if you do want to hire a mixer to do a full album, maybe just send them a single and get them to do the single. And if they nail the single, then give them the rest of the album. You know, there's all kinds of things you can do. I'm not a big fan of getting people to do it for free. Pay them to do their job, you know, when you can. But if you're unsure, just pay them to do one song. They'll probably charge you more for one song than they would of an average of 10. But, you know, that's part of the process. And maybe you work with them and finesse the mix to be the place you want, knowing that when they come to do the album, they'll have all that information for it. How much processing should be applied to a sampled drum kit, Easy Drummer, where there are perfect samples? Should compression and EQ still be applied to each sound and to the drum bus, or is this just a taste thing? Yes and yes. Both of those last parts of that question, the answer is yes. I mean, yes, you should apply EQ and compression. And is it a taste thing? Yes. But the answer is what is appropriate. That's really just the answer. Often these perfect samples are perfect, and often they're too perfect. Often they've been compressed and EQ'd so much that they sound like fake drums. They sound like perfectly recorded drums, which, to be honest, if you solo any drum kit by any major artist you've ever listened to, they don't sound that perfect. They don't sound as perfect as these drum recordings would make you believe. Because when you do sample kits, people are sitting there and keeping it perfectly in tune, and they're building these perfect velocities. But when drummers play, they don't go, they don't play these perfect performances. Things are idiosyncratic. They play kicks loud, soft, medium, somewhere in between, all kinds of stuff. It's not a machine. And therein lies the problem. So, yes, applying EQ and compression to already perfected sounds can be a little bit destructive to your end result, but putting delays on, distorting them and messing it up a little bit is probably more of what I'd be doing. When I'm using, addictive drums or any of the other drums out there, I'm always randomizing them. I'm always messing them up because they sound too perfect, because they are, as you're saying, perfectly recorded and perfectly performed in a way that no drummer plays. And that's just not how music is made. So I do things to them, effects, but it's usually to randomize them and mess them up and make them sound less perfect. Not more compression and EQ to make them sound even more perfect. How much reverb is enough? How much is too much? I often struggle balancing getting ambience in my productions without making them sound too woolly. Well, I think the last part of your question is part of the answer. Be careful not to send a ton of low end into your reverbs. When I do a kick drum reverb, which I do often, I like a bit of reverb on the kick, or even a little bit of ambience on a bass guitar if I'm doing a kind of sax, Motown, Atlantic thing. If I'm doing that, I'm making sure there's not a lot of low end going into the reverb, because if I send a ton of low end in there, it just turns into this build up, and that is not pleasing. That is not pleasant. It's not a good thing. So I highly recommend that you keep and control your reverb sends. So basically take a high and low pass and make sure, do the kind of Abbey Road technique, control the amount of high-end fizz and low-end warble that goes on in your reverb. That's the first thing. Secondly, too much reverb. You're asking how much is too much. Well, I think if it just turns into a big wash and nothing is defined, it's just using your ears. It's taste. There's plenty of tracks that have a lot of reverb. And that is a good thing. But just make sure it's really, really super controlled and is done in keeping. And if you're not sure what that is, find reference tracks that you admire and reference those. But really, I think probably part of the problem is you're putting too much low end and too much high end into your reverbs. And so the top is just sizzle and the bottom end, as you're saying, is all woolly and too out of control. So it's really about controlling what frequencies are being exaggerated by the reverb. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this week's Fact Friday. Thank you ever so much for all of the amazing questions. Let us know what your experiences are with reverb, with gain staging on tracks, with all of these things. Please comment and question below. And of course, add some more questions for Fact Friday. I really appreciate everybody's time and thank you ever so much for watching. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the like button. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.